Putin just doubled military recruitment bonuses to 400,000 rubles, 5 times Russia's average monthly wage, and Russian forces are still recruiting from prisons and homeless shelters. But this desperate scramble for manpower exposes the biggest military lie of the 21st century. The world has lived in fear of Russian military power for decades, with NATO spending trillions on defense and entire nations restructuring their foreign policy around the threat of Russian invasion. If this fear is based on a lie, it changes everything. But the evidence goes far beyond recruitment problems. With 1,043,160 casualties, commanders being killed by their own troops, and an economy spending $25 billion just to find soldiers, Russia's military strength is revealed as the greatest deception in modern warfare. The data from Russia's own military recruitment crisis will prove that the second strongest army in the world exists only in propaganda videos. Putin signed a decree in July 2024 that exposed Russia's military desperation more clearly than any battlefield defeat. The standard military enlistment bonus jumped from 195,000 rubles to 400,000 rubles overnight, nearly 5 times Russia's average monthly wage. But even these massive payments couldn't solve Russia's recruitment crisis. Regional governments started offering bonuses that match U.S. military sign-on payments, sometimes reaching 500,000 rubles or more. The mighty Russian army was literally paying more than most Russians earn in a year just to find people willing to fight. The Institute for the Study of War reports that Russia spent $25 billion on military recruitment in just the first half of 2025. Between January and June, federal and regional budgets allocated 400 billion rubles for enlistment bonuses alone. But the money wasn't working. Despite these unprecedented payments, Russian forces began recruiting from prisons, homeless shelters, and even approaching football hooligans with offers of military service. The army that claims to be fighting NATO was reduced to recruiting criminals and homeless people as expendable manpower. The recruitment crisis reveals the fundamental lie behind Russian military power. An army that needs to pay 5 times the average wage and recruit from prisons isn't a professional military force. It's a desperate collection of mercenaries and criminals held together by unsustainable financial incentives. This isn't the second strongest army in the world. It's a facade crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. The desperate recruitment tactics spread across Russia like a contagion. According to multiple reports from British and Irish media, Russian armed forces began making rounds at correctional facilities, homeless shelters, and even extended recruitment pitches to soccer hooligans. The Express reported that Putin was desperately recruiting criminals, homeless, and football thugs, despite the practice being illegal under Russian law. The Mirror described Russian military recruiters raiding prisons and homeless shelters for what they called expendable manpower. But the recruitment from society's margins revealed something more disturbing than desperation. It revealed the true nature of Russian military strategy. These weren't soldiers being recruited for professional military service. They were cannon fodder being collected for suicide missions. The Irish Star reported that Russian forces were targeting jails, homeless facilities, and even making proposals to soccer hooligans. The systematic targeting of society's most vulnerable populations exposed the lie of Russian military professionalism. But the immediate consequence went beyond recruitment problems. The need to recruit criminals and homeless people proved that Russia's claimed military strength was built on propaganda rather than reality. A truly powerful military doesn't need to recruit from prisons. The mighty Russian army was revealed as a collection of desperate men with no other options, held together by unsustainable bonus payments and criminal recruitment practices. The economic impact of Russia's recruitment crisis began cascading through the entire economy. Business Insider reported that Russia's economy was burning the candle at both ends, loosening monetary policy to prop up growth while expanding wartime spending at unsustainable levels. The military recruitment bonuses created direct competition with civilian industries for labor, driving up wages and inflation across the economy. Russia's central bank was forced to raise interest rates repeatedly as the economy overheated from military spending, but the escalation revealed deeper structural problems. The Bruegel think tank reported that by late 2024, even the military-industrial sector showed signs of stagnation. The economy had butted up against its supply-side constraints. the Bank of Russia began directing credit to military-linked sectors, squeezing other parts of the economy. Meanwhile, structural weaknesses persisted. Russia lost major export markets for defense products, faced rising costs from sanctions evasion, and suffered from weak labor and migration policies. But the most damaging escalation was the revelation that Russia cannot indefinitely replace its forces at the current casualty rate without an involuntary reserve mobilization. Putin's refusal to order general mobilization proved he knew the war's true cost would destroy his political support. The escalation from recruitment problems to economic crisis to political vulnerability exposed the lie of Russian strength at every level of society. The casualty numbers tell the complete story of Russian military failure. According to Ukrainian military data, Russia has lost 1,043,160 troops killed and wounded since the invasion began. The Institute for the Study of War confirms that Russia cannot replace these losses at current rates, but the breaking point goes beyond numbers. Reports emerged of Russian commanders being killed by their own troops, units surrendering en masse, and widespread refusal to follow orders. The army was literally falling apart from within. The Express reported on Russian army meltdown as troops kill commander and surrender en masse. These weren't isolated incidents. They represented systematic breakdown of military discipline and morale. But the most revealing aspect was Putin's response to the crisis. Instead of addressing the underlying problems, he increased recruitment bonuses and expanded criminal recruitment. This wasn't military strategy. It was panic. The breaking point became obvious when Russia began recruiting football hooligans and homeless people while paying bonuses equivalent to 5 years of average wages. No professional military force would resort to such desperate measures unless facing complete collapse. The second strongest army in the world was revealed as a hollow shell, maintained only through unsustainable financial incentives and criminal recruitment practices that violated Russia's own laws. The pattern of Russian military failures revealed the scope of the deception. While Putin's propaganda machine promoted images of advanced weapons and professional soldiers, the reality was an army of criminals, homeless people, and desperate men recruited through financial coercion. The critical revelation came from analyzing Russia's military-industrial production. Despite massive government spending, the defense sector couldn't produce enough equipment to replace battlefield losses. Sanctions had crippled the supply chains needed for advanced weapons production. But the revelation went deeper than production problems. Russia's military doctrine, training, and command structure were fundamentally flawed. The army operated like a Soviet-era force with modern equipment, but without the competence to use that equipment effectively. The recruitment crisis exposed this incompetence most clearly. A professional military develops soldiers through training and discipline. Russia's approach, recruiting criminals and paying massive bonuses, proved the army lacked the institutional capability to create effective soldiers. But the most damaging revelation was political. Putin's refusal to order general mobilization proved he knew the Russian people wouldn't support the war if they understood its true cost. The mighty Russian army existed only as long as most Russians didn't have to serve in it. The critical revelation was that Russian military power was always a lie, maintained through propaganda and the West's willingness to believe Putin's threats. International analysts began documenting every aspect of Russian military failure systematically. Think tanks like the Institute for the Study of War, Chatham House, and Bruegel published detailed analyses exposing the gap between Russian propaganda and military reality. The new strategy focused on truth-telling rather than threat assessment. Instead of analyzing Russian capabilities based on propaganda claims, analysts examined actual battlefield performance, recruitment practices, and economic sustainability. But the strategic shift went beyond analysis. NATO nations began adjusting their defense planning based on Russia's actual capabilities rather than claimed capabilities. The alliance realized it had been over-preparing for a threat that existed primarily in propaganda videos. The new approach treated Russia as a declining power with limited conventional capabilities rather than a near-peer competitor. This shift allowed for more efficient defense spending and more realistic threat assessments. But most importantly, the new strategy focused on exposing the lie of Russian military power to global audiences. Every recruitment crisis, every economic strain, every battlefield failure was documented and publicized. The goal was to strip away the fear that had allowed Putin to influence global politics through military threats that had no basis in reality. The emperor's new clothes finally fell away completely. Russia's recruitment crisis, economic strain, and battlefield failures proved that Putin's military might was always an illusion maintained through propaganda and Western willingness to believe his threats. The new reality changed global strategic calculations fundamentally. Russia wasn't a military superpower. It was a declining power with nuclear weapons, limited conventional capabilities, and an economy strained to the breaking point by unsustainable military spending. But the resolution went beyond military analysis. Putin's threats lost their credibility once the world understood the reality behind Russian military power. The fear that had shaped global politics for decades evaporated as the truth became undeniable. The recruitment crisis became the symbol of Russian military failure. An army that recruits from prisons and homeless shelters while paying bonuses equivalent to 5 years of wages isn't a professional military force. It's a desperate collection of mercenaries held together by financial coercion. But the ultimate resolution was political. Putin's power had always depended on the perception of Russian military strength. Once that perception collapsed, his ability to influence global events through military threats disappeared with it. The second strongest army in the world was revealed as the greatest military deception of the 21st century, and the world finally stopped being afraid of Putin's hollow threats. Russia's recruitment crisis transformed the world's understanding of military power by exposing the greatest deception of the 21st century. The army that claimed to be the second strongest in the world was revealed as a collection of criminals, homeless people, and desperate men held together by unsustainable financial incentives. The $25 billion spent on recruitment bonuses, the targeting of prisons and homeless shelters, and the 1,043,160 casualties all prove that Russian military strength was always an illusion maintained through propaganda and Western willingness to believe Putin's threats. But the collapse of the Russian military myth changes more than strategic calculations. It eliminates the fear that has shaped global politics for decades, and Putin's hollow threats can no longer influence world events, now that everyone sees the emperor has no clothes.